Welcome to LeaderCast. You're listening to episode 307.
As followers of Jesus and leaders who help people follow Jesus, our mission is clear: to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
So today we want to talk about our mission as a lens through which all decisions get made. Our mission as a way to propel people to action.
So over on the blog, Tim unpacks Matthew 28:16 through 20 as a reminder about our mission. It's much more than a reminder. He unpacks Matthew 28. Our focus is disciples who make disciples. So we're going to link to Tim's blog on the show notes page at transformingmission.org/307.
And today we want to talk about 3 ways to keep the mission at the center of our leadership. There are others. We're going to offer 3 today.
Can I make that 4?
Yeah, because you're always gonna jump in and change what I say. Yeah.
Well, we'll just blame that on my maximizer talent. Gotta go the extra. And I say this because it's probably the simplest, easiest way that we can keep the mission at the center of our leadership. And that's to model it. Do I need to say more?
So can I offer this to get us started? Our mission is about Jesus.
It is? I'm sorry. Sarcasm to start the episode. Please, Tim, get us started with the first way to keep the mission as our focus.
Well, the first way to keep the mission at the center of our leadership comes around expectations. The question becomes, do you expect people to live into the mission? In what ways are you equipping people to do so? I guess maybe you're getting 2 for 1 here. Expect people to focus on the mission by focusing on the mission as a leader. Oh, that's revolutionary, isn't it? As a leader, you focus on the mission to model. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's clear. We're about making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Can I say it again? It's very clear about what we're about. Maybe we need to unpack that sometime, Sarah, but that's the focus. And you as a leader, focus upon that and model for the people who are entrusted to your care.
So if the expectations are around making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, then we lead with disciple making. We lead with a focus on Jesus. We lead with an expectation that lives are going to be transformed. So why don't we offer a couple of examples to contrast what we're talking about? And let's start with a positive example. What would happen to bring our mission into focus, to keep it at the center of your leadership? What would happen if you hosted a Bible study at every meeting, helping people deepen their relationship with Jesus, one another, and your surrounding community?
What do you mean by every meeting?
Every meeting. Trustees, finance, leadership team, student ministry, every time a group gathers to do the work of the church. You're focused on 2 things. Every meeting. The things that you focus on are, where did you see and experience Jesus since we last met? And then helping people study the scripture so that their eyes and their heart and their soul is, transformed.
Sarah, I was a pastor of a church once where people said, we want you to lead Bible study. And I said, okay, when's the time you want to meet? Well, we don't have time to meet. And I said, okay, when would be a good time for us to even think about Bible study? Well, we just don't know, but we need Bible study. So just what you've said, we tried to make every meeting a small Bible study that focused upon not only the scripture, but how that affected us as leaders in leading the church. So it can happen. I've done it. but it was not easy because, as you mentioned, trustees, finance, we'd have a little Bible study and they'd say, we're not here for that. We're here to take care of the building, or we're here to talk about the finances. And I've always created problems wherever I've been. So my answer was, well, that's not really why you're here. You're here to help make disciples of Jesus Christ. You're facilitating the mission by caring for the building and taking care of finances. And so each meeting became a disciple-making meeting focused upon Scripture as well as the task that was at hand. So is that what we're talking about?
You've just described it beautifully, what we're talking about. So how about we contrast that with what we're not talking about? And how I might say it is, when you have an agenda, a cause, or a platform that you're trying to advocate for, you're not focused on the mission.
So let me just continue to irritate people, Sarah. What we're not talking about is being a liberal voice, a conservative voice, or a moderate voice, because when you come from that perspective, you have an agenda. And the agenda we're talking about in the mission of the church is God's mission, the mission we have through Jesus. All these other things are distractions from the mission. We don't need another agenda. Jesus is our agenda. Following Jesus is our curriculum. We're equipping people to follow Jesus and a path forward. Ask me if I have any feeling around that, Sarah.
You have feelings about it, and I have feelings about it as well. And part of what I see happen, and I've caught myself doing it too, is we all come with perspectives. And we have experiences, and we have things, yes, that we are passionate about. However, when you are leading a group of people that we call the church, part of what I have always assumed is that there are people with differing perspectives that are in that room. And the unifying voice in that room is Jesus. So if Jesus is the unifying voice, let's start with Jesus. And let's focus on Jesus. And then you begin to have conversations that bring in those differing perspectives and raise questions and help people to understand who Jesus is and how Jesus comes to life in different contexts. That's the power of Jesus when you start with Jesus. If you don't start with Jesus and you start with an agenda or even a point of view, what you immediately do is shut down a whole group of people. You alienate a whole group of people. You miss the point with the whole group of people. You forget why you're there with the whole group of people. I'll stop. Is there anything more that you want to offer on that one?
You just served up an easy ball to hit, and that is, it matters where you start. And
Correct.
If you're starting with Jesus, Jesus informs all of our other thoughts, our platforms, our agendas. Because if we start with our agendas, as you've already said, we've pushed Jesus to the sidelines. And what we're about, as we've said from the beginning, Jesus is our reason. Jesus is our mission.
And I think that's a good segue into the second way to keep the mission at the center of our leadership is to focus on growth, to focus on growing as a follower of Jesus. And what I want you to hear is the growth piece of that. We've already talked about being a follower of Jesus and focusing on Jesus, but the growth.
So being called a disciple is to be a student of Jesus. That growth's implied in that, isn't it?
It's implied, yes. Growth might be another word for transformation, too, to point to another part of the mission. I would say, like everything in life, if as leaders we're not intentional about focusing on equipping people to grow as followers of Jesus, we leave it to chance.
Focus on transformation, focus on growth. I've been doing some reading, Sarah, about following Jesus. Jesus saying, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of people, help you catch people." Actually, if we do a deep dive on that scripture, it means follow Jesus is to learn from me so you can be who God created you to be. It's not so much you're out there trying to bring people in, it's being who you were created to be. Follow me, and I'll help you live the life you're supposed to live. So that's what it means for transformation and growth.
So, Tim, you've been in ministry for over 50 years as a leader. And before that, you were a part of a congregation. You were also a disciple of Jesus. How many times have you read that scripture, being fishers of men?
I without exaggeration, it would be nearly 100 or more.
And each time you read that passage, do you get the same thing out of reading that scripture every time you read it?
I do not. I think that's the reason I just gave you something I just was thinking about and learning.
And that's the beautiful part about opening up the scripture. God is always speaking something new to us. It doesn't matter how many times we've read it or how many times we've heard it. If we're open to who God is inviting us to be, God is always inviting us to become more of who he created us to be.
Well, discipling people, Sarah, what I'm learning more and more, and I wish I had learned this earlier, but discipling people is how Jesus discipled people. And what he did was love people. He cared for them. He became related to them in such a way that they were important. And if we're going to learn, be transformed, we ourselves as followers of Jesus, that's what we're talking about. I mean, I've been through all kinds of classes and situations, seminars and stuff on leading people to Jesus, saying the right words, having the right things, making sure everybody is in the same place in terms of their economic situations, their ethnic relationships. And really what it is and what I've grown in making disciples is that we love one another the way God and Jesus has loved us in whatever situation or circumstance. And we love them in such a way that they say, I'd really like to be a part of what you're a part of.
Yeah. And so part of what I'm hearing you point to, Tim, is when I think about growing as a follower of Jesus, the love that you are pointing to is the support that we need to grow. But that's not all we need. We need that love also to challenge us. And we're challenged, and we can encounter those challenges when we know people love us. It's not just about, come and we're gonna look at the most difficult Bible passages that, the ones that people argue about all over the place. And you do that in an environment where there isn't love. You're asking for a disaster to happen. People aren't going to grow in the midst of that.
Yeah, it's part of. I'm stumbling around. I've got so many things going in my mind, but part of the reason for the church is to help us not only grow in that faith, but to be related to people who will help us sharpen that faith. It's part of the accountability. It's part of, it's part of let's do it this way. I remember a person in a small group. She attended not because she wanted to be a part of a small group, but because she had been through a real difficult time in her life. And some of her friends said, when I've gone through times like this, I've met with other people. I'm in a group. Why don't you come with me? And you don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. Just come and experience what we experience together. And to make this very quick, what she said was, I experienced a group of people that cared for one another regardless of what they thought, feel, or going through. And then I began to talk about what I was going through. And before I knew it, I was becoming more of a person that was not focused upon my pain and all the hurts and stuff that were in my life at that time, but finding ways that I could invite, care, and love other people. The church at its best does that, Sarah. Yeah. And that's what a disciple is.
Yeah. And so you're highlighting one of the many reasons why I think we've pointed to small groups throughout our life together in congregations, that whatever form that small group takes, it might be a temporary group that's meeting for 6 weeks. It might be long-term. Those are the safe places for adults and students and kids to experience the challenge and the support, to experience those moments of new things, of recognition that you're naming, and also the love that comes. That's hard to do on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Because the group is too large for that.
So one of the things, as we talk about it, one of the things that we've that I've learned, that my friend taught me, was that when she wanted to learn to pray, because she was not a prayer, and she said she wanted to learn to pray, she had a group of people that said, she said, I want to pray every day. And so they said, we'll help you. She came back the next week or the next time they met, and they said, how did it happen? Did you pray every day? She said, well, Monday through Thursday I did, but I got busy on Friday and Saturday. I just lost focus. And they said, why don't we call you the time you want to pray on those days, and we'll pray with you. And before it was all over, she said, I was in a pattern of praying every day, but I had people calling me occasionally to ask if I would pray with them or for them. The small group was not, the accountability was not, did you pray? Why not? We're going to need to get you to do this. They said, let us help you. That's what accountability does more than anything else. And so if we have trouble loving people, why don't we trust the people around us to say, you know, there's some people I have some real difficulty with. I need to be able to love them the way God's loved me. Now, don't take that as that everything has to be the same way with everybody, but it gives you the opportunity to say, I'm still having difficulty here. And they say, well, how can we help you do what you need to do?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, making disciples and being disciples in a local church setting.
And growing as disciples.
And growing as disciples, yes.
Yeah. So we're giving an example, inviting people to have opportunities to experience relationship is really what we're pointing to. Where does growth happen? Growth happens in and through relationships with others. So I think the question that leads me to is, what opportunities exist for people to feel challenged and supported in their growth as followers of Jesus?
I guess, Sarah, the questions I would want to ask, it's nothing great wisdom I have. It's just that when you think about your faith journey, are you becoming more like Jesus? And where is the fruit of love, the joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control? Where is that coming out in your life? How are you helping others live live with God's love and loving others as you've been loved? That might be a good place to start, just with conversation with some trusted people. Okay, well, the third way to keep the mission at the center is to focus on grace. And we're not talking about the cheap grace here of anything goes. What we're talking about is growing in grace. As I think about that, growing in love for God and your neighbor, following Jesus is not a checklist. Following Jesus is not about being right. Following Jesus is a way of life. God's God's love in Jesus isn't so small that when you mess up, the world's going to fall apart. And maybe just think about God's love in Jesus is so large that when you do mess up, Jesus opens his arms and says, I've got you. Still love you.
Because we're a part of the United Methodist Church, weren't the general rules and the societies what set the foundation of the Methodist movement to grow in grace?
Yes, societies, classes, bands, yes.
And those societies and classes and bands had three things that they followed, and we've shortened them and forgotten some of the context of what those general rules were about, but doing no harm, doing good, and tending to the ordinances of God. Most recently, you may have heard that expressed as stay in love with God. I think there's some nuances there that get missed when we say stay in love with God.
Sarah, I think with any movement or organization, especially the church, when it gets started, there's lots of excitement. We like what's going on. It helps us be who we need to be. And now what I'm talking about is all those years ago when the Wesleys started the Methodist movement. And it wasn't even their name, Methodist. It was the name given to them because they followed a method of being followers of Jesus. I mean, they studied the scriptures. They even called Bible malls because they were in the Bible so much. But there are some things in those general rules that are actually very helpful about doing no harm, avoiding evil. And one of them is uncharitable and unprofitable conversation.
Oh,
particularly speaking evil of government officials or ministers.
Can we just like plaster that all over the world? If we tried to do that, I was going to say a week. I don't know that we could last a week. Maybe a day, and see what might be different. And then there's some things that we have all heard, and probably many times, like doing unto others as we would not, they should do unto us. Language has changed so much. We're reading directly from the discipline on how the general rules are written. Doing what we know is not for the glory of God.
And all that's under the category of causing harm.
Right.
Yeah.
And the one I kind of laughed at, and I laughed partially because I'm not sure what it means, and now I'm curious, is softness and needless self-indulgence. Now, needless self-indulgence, I get. I'm not really sure what softness means. And where I went on the needless self-indulgence was, does that include my Diet Coke? Because I'm in trouble.
I need to find out what the softness is. And needless self-indulgence, to me, immediately what comes to mind is it's my way or the highway.
Yeah, the self-centered.
Yeah.
The self-centeredness. And there are also, just to name a couple of the other items in this category, laying up treasure on earth, borrowing without the probability of paying, or taking up goods without the probability of paying for them. And that's not talking about stealing. Maybe it is talking about stealing. I think it was more about being in debt. It's expected of all who continue in these societies that they should continue to evidence their desire of salvation. And that's under do no harm. I don't know what that communicates to you, Tim, and how you understand that line, but to me it says, are you living in alignment with Jesus? Are you loving people? Are you loving God and neighbor? Are you becoming more of who God created you to be? Are you growing in grace?
Right. And the one that just would jump off at any of us today is taking the name of God in vain. And the way I think of that is not by language, but by saying I'm a follower of Jesus and then living differently. That creates harm. That may create more harm in our culture today than any other time, is to say I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a Christian, and then live as if being under Christian influence makes no difference at all.
So again, we're talking about the general rules under the category of growing in grace, and those were all about doing no harm. Let's talk about doing good a little bit. I'm going to read the full statement because we usually stop there. By doing good, by being in every kind merciful after their power, as they have opportunity, doing good of every possible sort, and as far as possible, I'm going to change the language here a little bit, to all people.
Sarah, the first thing that comes to mind for me as I read other parts of that, by doing good, is something that I've learned from you that I think you brought to light for all of us, may have been something that Brene Brown gave us, and that is just being generous with people. Yeah. That would be a great way of doing good, is just being generous with people. And it's more than giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's actually being in relationship in such a way that you say, if I were in that person's position, maybe I'd be doing the same thing.
Yes. Are we ready to move on to the third general rule?
You mean the one by attending upon all the ordinances of God?
Yes.
Such as public worship of God. The ministry of the word, either read or expounded. We call that studying the scripture or searching the scripture. The supper of the Lord, Holy Communion, family and private prayer. Here's searching the scriptures, fasting or abstinence. I jumped in and took them all, Sarah, because I like them so well. So I didn't leave one for you.
You didn't need to leave one for me. I think the thing that I want to underscore about these, and what hit me as I read these again, was in the summary paragraph. It said, "And all these we know, his Spirit writes on truly awakened hearts." It's an invitation to be open to God. These are the ways that we encounter God, and God transforms lives. So when we talk about growing in grace, well, the language of the general rules may be outdated. Okay, it is outdated. It's a historical document. It's going to sound different than we speak today. They're wonderful reminders, and they're a call back to, our focus on Jesus.
And as we started this particular section, a focus on grace.
Correct.
And Wesley called these the means of grace, so that by practicing, by doing no harm and by doing good and paying attention to the ordinances of God, we were actually practicing or participating in ways in which we experience God's grace and extend God's grace. And this was Wesley's pattern for growing as a disciple. Part of what we've talked about already in this podcast. It's part of the transformation. And I think because we live in a world that new seems to be always better, and that if we just had the next best thing, we would be all right. We even talk about what are best practices. If we just go back to who we are and how we got here, we might be a whole lot better off.
Yeah. Yes. You said that very well. And thank you for bringing this episode to a close. Our intention is to remind you of our mission and offer a few ways as leaders we can stay focused on the mission in the midst of a world that seems to try to pull us in every direction, but be focused on the mission. You also received a bonus lesson on Methodist history. So just take that as a bonus. As always, you can find show notes at transformingmission.org/podcast. And this is episode 307. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.